Welcome. My name is Isabella Brusati and I am the founder of Isabella Brusati Consulting. We address the people and project dimension of change management. When dealing with my clients, one of the problems that they address, especially when they want to determine whether to carry on with a change management initiative or not, is how to assess whether the initiative is going to be successful or not. Specifically, whether they are going to encounter a significant amount of resistance. We know that resistance to change is part of every single change management initiative, and it's actually a normal reaction, it's a human reaction. I prefer to stay in the status quo unless the benefits of changing are significantly higher than what it takes to implement the change. If the benefits basically are higher than the costs, well, therefore, it's going to be in my interest to carry on with the change initiative. So how do we assess these driving and these resisting forces? Well, fundamentally, there are two different tools. The first one is the force field analysis, which was devised by Lewin, and the other one is a stakeholder analysis. The importance of understanding the driving and the resisting forces is going to enable the senior executives, the change sponsor, the change management, and the change agents basically to leverage on these forces. Resistance is not necessarily bad. In fact, for example, when we are proposing a specific work stream, actually instead of going to the supporters, taking the view of those that are not particularly keen on it can actually help us to devise a better strategy. And that's because by answering the points and the doubts of people that are resisting this specific initiative, we can actually understand what are the weaknesses or potential weaknesses of this specific initiative. Of course, in some cases, the resistance is pretty capricious, so it's not objective, but in some cases, actually, it is pretty objective, and therefore, the change executives, so the change sponsor, the change manager, or the change agents can actually use also the resisting forces to devise and to implement a more successful change initiative. In this specific video, I am going to address the force field analysis. When there is no change, it means that both the driving forces and the resisting forces are in balance. As we can see in this simple example, the two forces, so the driving forces on the left and the resisting forces on the right, basically have got the same strength. However, change is triggered. Change is usually triggered by external elements. So there can be, for example, a change in legislation. There can be, for example, let's take the recent financial meltdown. So it means that when the change is triggered, one of the two forces, at least at first, is going to prevail. The aim is actually to get back to a level of equilibrium so that we can implement the change and then basically make the change stick. How do we carry out a force field analysis? There are fundamentally three different steps. The first step is to identify the driving and the resisting forces and their strengths. So in some cases, there may be a part of the stakeholders that would be more keen on that specific change initiative. In some cases, there may be some departments or individuals that are resisting. Why do they resist? Because the change is seen as a threat to their status quo, is seen as a threat to their personal interest. They may see, for example, a change in status. They may see, for example, their job at risk. They may see, for example, a change, a threat in a change in their remuneration, and so on. These elements have to be addressed before you decide to implement the change management initiative. This is basically at strategic level. Most of the companies tend to downplay the resisting forces, saying, well, you know what, we got the support of the senior executives, we can go ahead. In some cases, some executives play politics. They say that they do support the change, whilst in fact then they are going to drag their feet. So it seems like it's a waste of time, but in reality, understanding the driving forces but also the resisting forces and how to leverage on both of them, it's extremely important. And in fact, the second step is to determine how you can influence those forces and how to leverage them to facilitate the implementation of the change management initiative. Resistance to change is not necessarily bad. As we said, is a human reaction. By addressing also the interests of those who are resisting the change, you can actually decide what kind of strategies you can implement in order to influence these people. In every single change management initiative, it's extremely unlikely, not to say impossible, that you will get 100% of people agreeing to the change. So you will go ahead anyway, and it's very likely that those who will be disruptive would have to be removed from the organization. I am not saying that you got to go ahead and dismiss everyone who says that he or she doesn't agree with a change initiative. That's not how an organization is managed, and most of all not how a change management initiative is successfully implemented. But there will be a core of individuals that are not ready to move on, regardless the support that you want to give them. In these cases, it means that their interests are clearly not aligned with the one of the organization, and it is very likely that the best solution for both parties is to part companies. Also, you would have to look at the medium and short-term impact, the pros and the cons of the initiative that you want to implement. Let's pretend that in order to facilitate the change management initiative and therefore to influence those who are not particularly keen, you decide to set a specific financial reward. So if people are going to reach a certain goal by a certain time, they will get this specific amount of money. So basically linked to performance. I mean, look like this is perfectly okay, but you would have to assess what kind of impact it's going to have, not only in the short term, but also in the medium term and in the long term. Is this going just to be a patch to fix a temporary problem? Is it going to motivate people to change and to stick to the change? Is this going to be disruptive for the compensation policies within the company? So it's something that you have to assess, and that's before you start going ahead, so announcing the change and implementing it. So we are still talking about strategic level, and it's about planning change successfully. We'd also have to look at this model that was proposed by Strebel and the forms of resistance. In particular, he looked at the 4 different areas with which change managers and change agents have to basically deal. This is a very, very common situation. We see that on the left we got the resistance forces, so basically resistance to change, so unwillingness to change the status quo, whilst on the right basically we got the change force. So it is basically the driving forces, those who are basically willing to go ahead. We can see that in both cases we got strong and weak, and the intersection of these 2 elements, so these 2 dimensions, and the weakness and the strength, basically determines a different scenario and of course it will require specific action to be taken. So let's take into consideration the first case, which actually is weak resisting force but also weak changing force. This is actually also called the flip-flop change or sporadic change. And basically this is actually, there is no specific interest to go ahead with the change initiative, but at the same time, there is not even a lot of resistance. That means that if the change is going to go ahead, very likely it will not persist. It's very likely that the situation will go back to the original state because it can be very, very easily reversed. We also have the case of the continuous change. So we got strong change forces and weak resistance. This is actually probably the best case scenario because it means that there is a strong willingness for the organization to go from point A to point B, and also there is not a lot of resistance. It means that it will require still some measures in order to win over those who are weakly resisting the change, but this is a kind of organization where change occurs continuously, so it's not seen as a threat but actually is seen as a normal course of action. I must say that it's very, very hard to get to work in an organization, to get an organization to be at this point. We then have the other dimensions. So we can see actually when the resistance to change is very strong and the change force is very weak. Well, in this case, the possibility that the change is going to go ahead and be successful is fundamentally remote. And that's because the resisting forces are going to basically clash and crush down every effort to change the current status quo, also because the changing forces, so the interest of those that actually want to go to the new situation, to the new point, are fundamentally very, very weak. So they will not persist, they will not look at solutions, they will not look at basically the two elements that we saw before. So basically the how to leverage the forces, and in this case the resisting forces, to basically get the change management initiative to succeed. We then have actually a very, very common case where the changing forces are very strong, but also the resisting forces. When this happens, it's very likely that the change is going to be significant and actually the system is snapped into a new configuration. So for example, if we got an organization that is very bureaucratic, is very is divided in layers, people work in a silo, and actually we want to go into an organization that has got a streamlined, lean organization, no bureaucracy, lots of communication in both directions. Well, it's very likely that we will face a lot of resistance. However, if the change force is very strong and the management is very skilled and capable of winning over the resisting forces, it's very, very likely that the system will go from point A, very bureaucratic, very slow, basically bogged down by policies and procedure, into the new situation. So we can see that this method, this tool, is basically very straightforward. What actually surprises me is that when I deal with clients, they always think that things have to be significantly complicated. It's true that the tool in itself is very simple in terms of how it works. Then of course the skills of consultants and the skills of the management is to be able to leverage both on the resisting forces and on the change forces. So If you are going to deal with a change management initiative, I strongly suggest to have a look at the force field analysis and how you can implement this tool to facilitate change and also to increase significantly the possibility that the change management initiative in your firm is going to be successful. If you want more information about change management, please visit my website www.isabellabrusati.com. Also, if you want to discuss change management within your organization and how my firm can support you, please feel free to contact me. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.